Hello, welcome to A Friend Remembers and the latest video in the year of the JRPG. And today we're looking at the video game Shainingu Fōsu and asking if it's worth you revisiting this 16-bit classic of the genre. You may not have heard of Shainingu Fōsu, it's a fairly old series now. It was one of the premier RPG games on the 16-bit Sega Mega Drive or Sega Genesis in America series of consoles. This is a fantastic console. The Mega Drive really gave the Super Nintendo a run for their money. It was peak Sega as a hardware publisher and software developer, and they created this game using the studio that was named Sonic Software Planning, named after the mascot of the franchise. You may have heard of Sonic Software Planning. They have a different name now. They're now known as Camelot Software Planning. They changed the name when they stopped working with Sega and started working with Nintendo, and they went on to make games such as Golden Sun for the Game Boy Advance, which is considered by many people one of the greats of the JRPG genre. They now tend to do Mario Tennis and Mario Golf style games. There's not many RPGs coming from them, but this studio is still around. And Shainingu Fōsu, it's not the first RPG game they made, but it's probably the most important and the most significant of their 16-bit output. Now, a lot of people don't associate the Mega Drive with fantastic JRPG games. I would argue the Mega Drive does compete with the Super Nintendo as the 16-bit console was. The two consoles are fairly evenly matched. But in terms of RPG games, it's the one thing I would hands down say the Super Nintendo has the Mega Drive beat. Just in terms of Legend of Zelda, Final Fantasy, Dragon Quest, Chrono Trigger, there's some truly epics of the genre on the Super Nintendo that you just can't get on the Mega Drive. But that doesn't mean the Mega Drive didn't have fantastic JRPGs. It had a few, and Shainingu Fōsu really is one of them. It's a very interesting game. If I had to relate it to a franchise that you might be familiar with, it plays most similar to Fire Emblem, as in it's a tactical JRPG. It's top down, you move characters around the board and then they attack each other. They can travel certain distances and they have different attacks that have different ranges. Even though this came out after the first Fire Emblem game, the developers were not inspired by Fire Emblem. In their mind, they didn't like the pacing of that game. They wanted to call right the way back to Dragon Quest and standard JRPG genres. Shainingu Fōsu is a very weird beast when you first encounter it. It feels a little bit generic, a little bit 1980s high fantasy. It's got centaurs and flying hawkmen and a range of creatures which honestly didn't appear in many of the JRPGs produced around the same time. So it feels a little bit unique compared to its contemporaries, but at the same time it's not unique. It's actually a very broad mix. They really threw everything they had at you. You've got steam mechanical creations, you've got a talking hamster with an army helmet, you've got centaurs, lots of centaurs, you've got men with swords, you've got archers, you've got dwarves. The enemies are skeletons or dark wizards or dark mages or laser robots that can shoot you from the far side of the battlefield. It's a very eclectic mix. So when I first started playing this game, that mix meant that the game felt like it didn't really have its own identity at first. But once I'd played a few hours in, it really begins to shine. It's a 16-bit RPG, so the writing is pretty low bar. It's not going to stand up to modern games in the genre, but it's got a good, unique wit. It's quite charming. There is a good amount of engagement. The plot is fairly by the numbers. You go here, beat this enemy. You go there. There's an overarching villain, but there's a good pace and a good development as you're constantly trying to prevent the villain from resurrecting this dark evil. And it does at least keep things moving and keep you with engaging boss fights. The gameplay really is where this stands out though. So I said it's a tactical RPG, you move the character on the field. The one problem being that you can't skip turns. So particularly at the start of most battles, when you've got a team of maybe 6 characters and there might be up to 15 enemies scattered across the map, when the enemies start taking their turn, you have to sit and watch every enemy manually move around the field, and it can be quite slow and quite plodding. Once you adjust to the pacing though, and particularly once the battles start underway and you start cutting down the number of enemies you're fighting against, these become real tense tactical encounters. Tactics wise, some battles are better than others. The big problems tend to be mobility, because characters like centaurs can't navigate over mountainous terrains or trees, so you can use flying characters to cross rivers, whereas everyone else has to use a bridge. On open plains, the centaurs can move far distances, whereas archers or soldiers or dwarves in particular can't move very far. So there's a lot of problematics just moving your characters around the battlefield. If anyone gets cut down, unlike Fire Emblem, you don't lose them forever. You can be resurrected after the battle, and if you lose too many characters, you can retreat from the battle, go back and spend your money resurrecting the characters. As long as you've killed some enemies, you'll have earned some money and you'll have made enough money to resurrect, so you're not going to be penalised for struggling. On the flip side, anyone you have cut down, any money you have gained in, you'll keep. So you can grind through this game. Now, I'm not an advocate saying one of the great things about the JRPG genre is the ability to grind, but this game never need be difficult. If you're struggling with an encounter, you just fire everyone you have at it, let them all get cut down. But as long as you've made some progress and some characters have leveled up, then you can just have another go. You can't go back and play old battles. It's got a very linear narrative where you do this battle, then you do that battle, then you do that battle, and you progress around the world on this series of single engagements. But your characters will evolve and level up and change in some quite unique ways, because you have control over your party. There's actually over a dozen different, more than 24 different characters you can promote. Some of them are missable, some of them will be forced into your team, some of them you have to talk to NPCs and recruit them and maybe complete little side quests to actually get them in place. It's very easy to miss a couple of these characters if you don't know what you're doing. Once you've got them in your party, you then choose a set number of them to engage in the battlefield, and for every action they take, they'll get experience points and they will level up. What they actually unlock as they level up is partially randomized. And even more than that, not only is it randomized, exactly which statistics will level up, there is a promotion system where once they reach level 10, you can promote them to a higher job class, and once they're in the higher job class, they will level up even more quickly than they did before. There's a risk-reward dynamic here, though, because the later you promote them, the higher level they are before you promote them, the higher the total level and the better their potential maximum stats could be at the end of the game. So you can delay promoting someone until they reach level 20, suffer them being underpowered through the mid stages of the game, but turn them into an absolute beast of a unit at the end of the game. Of course, only the characters you actually engage with on the battlefield will go through this process. So when you select your party, you really do have to make tactical choices of which characters do you like, which ones give you the mobility, which ones give you the range, which ones give you the magic to overcome the challenges ahead. This is why I said I found the start of the game a little bit plodding, but once my party had maxed out in terms of size, once I'd recruited enough people to be making these decisions, it turned into a really fantastic experience where you feel powerful, you feel engaged, you feel personally connected to these characters that you've invested the time in to get them across the line. Some characters peak early, and of course, if this is your first time playing the game, you wouldn't know this, but some characters peak early, their maximum potential stats are not that high. Other ones, like Arthur, are absolutely pathetic at the start of the game, and it can be a real challenge to get them to make the kills that they need for them to level up. But if you put the time in, if you put the effort in, they turn into fantastic. And the end of the game is a really tense and exciting series of boss battles that I came to love this. It's quite a long RPG for the time. It is a bit of a time sink, but I think anyone who's prepared to get through the first 3 or 4 hours in, you'll know if you're enjoying this game or not. It does have a very different feel, a very different pacing to the things I'd compare it to. Unlike Fire Emblem, you're not worried about characters being lost or cut down. I know the modern games have cut that aspect out to a certain extent, but this one, it flows, it looks fairly unique. The music is maybe a little bit of a weak point. I don't think the music's bad, but there aren't enough variety in the tube. You'll be hearing the same ditties again and again and again, and if you've got a low tolerance for the specific sound of the Sega Mega Drive sound chip, that could be a little bit of an issue. But I'd highly recommend anyone interested in Golden Sun games and want to know what Camelot did before, or 16-bit video games in general, or just retro JRPGs, give Shining Force a go. This is, I think, a little bit of an overlooked gem, and it's one of the, outside of Sonic and Phantasy Star and a few other series that Sega were known for at the time, this really was a powerhouse of the 16-bit era. I remember it being advertised and people talking about it. Never really dived into it until more recently, and I'm glad I gave it a go.